Joel says, through conscious realization, we must establish the truth of our oneness with God, our oneness with spiritual perfection. We're going to assume now that we have established this to a degree so that at least we know that this is the nature of our being. We may not be able to demonstrate it 100% of the time, or even perhaps 20% of the time. But we know we are spirit, one with the Father, one with each other as oneself. And so this has to be established before we can go further with his next statement. Then from there on, we're not dealing with persons or conditions. We're dealing only with the world of appearances or illusion.
Greetings from beautiful BC, Canada. Summer is here and the weather is nice. I believe you are doing great, and welcome to Stir Up Your Purpose channel. Thanks for stopping by. Today, I am sharing another Herb Fitch classic from the 1972 Realization of Oneness seminar titled Perfect Faith in a Perfect God. What can I say? I find this talk very illuminating and inspiring. As I listen to the talk, one statement that struck me goes like this: the substance of illusion is the same, whether it appears as a cold, a headache, a cancer, tuberculosis, a broken bone, poverty, or unemployment. It is always nothingness, the harm of flesh, appearance, and behind it is the activity of a universal malpractice or hypnotism produced by the universal belief in two powers. This sheds light on the persistent suggestion of the world mind that attempts to cause one to view things from the place of lack, limitation, struggle, pain, and so on. But as Herb says, if we have perfect faith in a perfect God, something happens in us. It is like putting starch in the collar of a shirt. Something starches up your awareness so that you can stand without being moved out of position. You think with a sense of conviction. There is a lucidity in your thoughts, as it were coming from another level, and you find suddenly you can understand the nature of illusion as something which normally persuades you to accept it as a reality. That is the infinite way. For those who are drawn or new to the infinite way of teaching, it is important to note that this idea is not about solving problems or getting things, but it is coming from the realization of oneness with a perfect God and abiding in this truth, and from there allowing infinite intelligence to reveal itself, and this happens naturally. Now, I want to share an experience to illustrate the importance of not trying to figure things out or wondering how things will work out, because if we are not watchful, we can miss the mark and go astray. Some of us might already be practicing these principles, but for me, coming across the works of Herb Fitch now allows me to have a better perspective and awareness and clarity of this truth. And I now integrate this infinite way of life on a conscious and deliberate way without doubt or fear. Though sometimes I wish I had come across this work much earlier. Anyway, let me get to my story. Just over a decade and a half ago, I moved to Canada. And one of the reasons for my moving to Canada was financial. I had a goal of making six-figure income. The goal was to achieve this in the marketing field because that was what I was doing before relocating to Canada. And I can say I was very successful in this area. For clarity purpose, I would like to indicate that this success was only achieved through applying my personal development studies to everything I do. I shared this story in the video titled on personal development, my story, my journey. Without getting too much into details, let me explain how this experience relates to this Herb Fitch talk. When I made the intention of that goal, I had no doubt in my mind. And when we abide in this awareness, infinite intelligence goes forth and orchestrates things for us. I believe just 2 weeks after my arrival in Canada, I met someone I knew at the mall. He was just standing in front of the mall. I had not seen him for close to 5 years or so. We had studied an IT course together. He had moved to Canada 3 years prior. When I told him I had just relocated to Canada, he right away mentioned that I should switch to IT and not bother with marketing. He gave me the address of an organization that will train and put me on projects after my training. I took the information, but at the back of my mind, I had no intention of pursuing that route. I thought marketing would be the way, especially based on my prior success, and I felt I would be able to replicate this in Canada. Oh boy, was I wrong. For the next probably couple of years, I did get jobs immediately in marketing, but it was a struggle. Marketing in Canada is quite different. And my natural nature of shyness and introversion got in the way. You can check the video, Social Anxiety is Not the End, my Neville Goddard story, where I talked about this. Later, the high that I am scared me, and I remember the encounter with my friend at the mall. And then I called the organization, it gave me, and like they say, the rest is now history. I have since achieved that financial goal. The takeaway of this story is to understand that when we abide in truth, that is, have perfect faith in a perfect God, this form called Ade will be moved to do the right and reasonable thing. It might not be the way we thought it would go, and that is why it is important not to get in the way and be fixated that it must be a certain way. I wasted probably a couple of years when I could have entered the field. Infinite intelligence had prepared a few weeks after arriving in Canada. There was no way in a million years I could have orchestrated the way infinite intelligence positioned that friend at the right place and at the right time. That said, even though I achieved my goal, I soon realized that I missed the mark. In retrospect, that goal was way below what I could have achieved. And that is what I came to realize. There is nothing like reaching a goal, but deep down in you, you knew you missed the mark. But you cannot place your hand on where you went wrong. And that was where I found myself a few years ago and began an earnest search to understand why I missed the mark. Along the way, this led me to overcoming my shyness, introversion, and also coming across the works of Herb Fitch and other great minds. And this also led me to sharing on social media platforms. I hope to share a detailed story of this journey at some point. The only suggestion I will have for those who want to go the infinite way is to develop trust and self-confidence not head knowledge, self-confidence, but the inner confidence of understanding and awareness that where you stands the undimensional and spaceless Christ, and view your world from that center. If this is your first encounter with the infinite way, I will say congratulations. For you have on your lap the principles that can unlock the hidden treasures of life without struggle. Only stand firm and put the principles to test through practice in any area such as health, time and money freedom, relationship, and so on. And watch as the form that you are and the world is moved in perfect orchestration by infinite intelligence. And as always, do not hesitate to reach out to me if you want to chat. Enjoy, and thanks for watching. Bye.
Can't help but comment today on the many smiles we've noticed. It's supposed to be a dreary day, but it's hard to prove it just looking around at the happy faces. In fact, this is one of those classes that in some way is almost finished before it begins. There's a real feeling that we have all brought with us a very special consciousness. It permeates all around us. We want to look at the chapter which we began last week, lifting up the eye. The first thing we want to look at is a very unusual statement made by Joel. It's almost a statement which is so complete in itself, yet when it is understood, you have the complete and total secret of the nature of error. I think it could begin right here on page 189. Joel says, through conscious realization, we must establish the truth of our oneness with God, our oneness with spiritual perfection. We're going to assume now that we have established this to a degree so that at least we know that this is the nature of our being. We may not be able to demonstrate it 100% of the time, or even perhaps 20% of the time. But we know we are spirit, one with the Father, one with each other as one self. And so this has to be established before we can go further with his next statement. Then from there on, we're not dealing with persons or conditions. We're dealing only with the world of appearances, or illusion. Now here's the important phrase. The illusion in one place may be a lake. The illusion in another may be a city. But it is all illusion. And the substance of an illusion is nothingness, whether it appears as a lake or a city. The substance of illusion is the same, whether it appears as a cold, a headache, a cancer, tuberculosis, a broken bone, poverty, or unemployment. It is always nothingness, the arm of flesh appearance, and behind it is the activity of a universal malpractice or hypnotism produced by the universal belief in two powers. Now then, the big statement is that this illusion on the left and that illusion on the right and the third illusion up there and the fourth illusion down here are all one and the same illusion. So that if in the office everybody is saying there's going to be an earthquake at 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. on January 4th, that's one illusion, but it's no different than the illusion on the other side which says I have a head cold. They're both the same illusion. And if you come across someone beating a dog and your heart bleeds for the dog, you're trapped into an acceptance of the third illusion. which is still the same illusion. The cold in the head, the beaten dog, the earthquake are one illusion. And so Joel's statement is that when you learn the nature of one illusion, you've learned the nature of all illusion. And then the alertness to the universal illusion is a path to freedom. So let's look at these three human-type illusions, which we see as three separate illusions when they're really one. The earthquake, the beaten dog, and the head cold. We know that God has not created earthquakes. We know that God is not standing by watching people beat dogs. And we know that God didn't give anybody a head cold. And if we have perfect faith in a perfect God, something happens in us. It's like putting starch in the collar of a shirt. Something starches up your awareness so that you can stand without being moved out of position. You think with a sense of conviction. There is a lucidity in your thought as if it were coming from another level. And you find suddenly you can understand the nature of illusion as something which normally persuades you to accept it as a reality. The talk gets hot and heavy and the fear jumps. The next thing you know, all of your teaching is out the window. All you can think of is, where can I put this body if that earthquake comes? Or the head cold is there, and you're angry at yourself because you're supposed to have known better, but here it is. And then you can't help but wince when you see somebody lash that dog. You want to tear it out of his hands. You want to cradle the dog. You want to stroke it. In all cases, this is material sense presenting different pictures to the one who is not alert to reality. Now let's go back to our perfect reality. Let's see that the real problem begins long before the physical birth. Infinity is so vast, there's no way that it can present itself to the finite mind. And so infinity presents itself to the finite mind through many veils, through many segments, so vast that in one lifetime you can only get a little bite out of the big apple. And so you see infinity, but don't know you're looking at it. You see a little portion in one lifespan, and another portion, and another portion, and then another. And every time you look out, you think you're seeing what's there, because the human mind has no capacity to see infinity. And so right at the start, we're pressured into an illusion. We cannot see any further than our human eyes can see, and they cannot see the wholeness that is present. And so with our other senses, we're limited again and again and again. And we learn finally that these limitations are not limitations at all, unless they're accepted as senses which convey to us reality. When you know they have no capacity to convey reality, then you are lifting yourself above the sense of sight and sound, touch, knowing that always infinity is present. And finally you know that you're in what may be called the fourth level, or the fourth world. And because you're in the fourth world, looking at infinity, you find that you are to be lifted up to three more levels. Into this fourth world comes a light, always present, but there is one to receive it, and so Jesus becomes Christ. And now you have a higher level made manifest in the fourth level. And it comes to show us that there is a way to a higher level, a fifth level, a sixth, and a seventh. The seventh being the eternal Sabbath or rest in which you live in reality. without seeing fractions of infinity, but live in infinity itself. And this light, made manifest as the Christ Jesus, now gives us a perfect preview of what happens when you are willing to place your perfect faith in the Father, knowing that reality is perfect and present. It does not create bodies of flesh that die. It does not envelop these bodies of flesh in earthquakes. It does not give them head cold. It does not beat them or beat animals. And it is always present. You begin to see that there is a universal illusion, and that its presence is there for a purpose, to help us develop perfect faith. Our perfect faith accepts the perfection that is present and looks through every form of that universal illusion, even to the point of looking through all that is material, until we see that the nature of the universal illusion is to create a fourth world. And our soul, hungry for union with its source, is taking us forever, leading us, guiding us, driving us to find that union with source which lifts us beyond the false sense of power that exists in the fourth world. And so we follow that light which was made manifest. We saw one who could walk through the fourth world untouched. And we tried to cognize the secrets that enabled him to do so. And one is, we discover, he learned that he was not present in a material body. He learned that there were no material conditions, that there were no material objects, that all that was present was the invisible light. And he discovered a carnal mind, a universal sense of the fourth world, which reinterpreted the light into the appearance of form called matter, and that all belief in matter emanates from this carnal mind, and that all belief in the evil of matter emanates from this carnal mind. All belief in the goodness of matter emanates from this carnal mind. And that this carnal mind, which recreates the light into an appearance called the fourth world, is a universal illusion itself. And that only through stepping out of the effects of that world illusion could we receive that light which guides us through the fourth world, lifting us into the fifth. And so that is what our work consists of. It is learning how to express the light by stepping aside from that which the carnal mind places before us as a world of material forms. To express the light is to express the invisibility of God into this fourth level. When we look at Jesus' healing, we see that he never was dealing with physical forms. He learned that the secret was to stand in the light of his own being as an infinite self, and to let the light reveal itself where the world saw material being. And this might be a good time to see that there are 7 levels of body. In each world there is another level of body. And in the fourth world, that level of body is a human body for us. But it isn't a human body in the 5th level or the 6th or the 7th. The human body is the world appearance, we assume, only at this level of consciousness. And so, as the Master did, in perfect faith we accept the body of light as the only body. And we can look at the body of flesh into which we have journeyed in the 4th level as a temporary condition imposed upon us only by the universal belief in material bodies. And we begin to lift ourselves simply by stepping aside from material sense. We do not deal with physical bodies or physical conditions. We step aside. And by stepping aside is meant we step out of the belief of the mind that physical form is present in any way. We cannot bleed for the beaten dog. We cannot fear for the earthquake. We cannot be angry at ourselves for having the head cold. We learn that we must step aside from this human sense of things, that we must take a Sabbath from mortality. And as we step aside, as we find the capacity to find a soul center instead of a 5-sense chilling fear, there is a quickening. And that's when the system begins to see the miracle of that which we had feared dissolving right before us. This quickening is the oil of the soul, the soul substance forming itself in your consciousness. And it releases us from the illusion of the world. Now, most of us, when we have attempted to heal ourselves or another, have been trapped in quite a number of ways. And the one way to finally get out of all of the traps is to not try to heal that condition or that person, but to recognize that you're dealing with a universal belief. Now, you may want to get rid of your head cold, but the best way not to get rid of it is to try to treat it as a head cold. You may want to remove the fear of the earthquake, but the best way not to remove the fear is to keep thinking you're going to in some way eliminate that earthquake. What we're getting at is that there's no earthquake to eliminate, and there is no head cold to get rid of. If you've gone that far that you think you've got to get rid of the head cold or protect against the earthquake, then you have not caught the idea that a universal illusion is not something you try to get rid of. And you don't try to get rid of it where you stand. Once you localize that illusion and think you're trying to get rid of it where you stand, you find your efforts are thwarted. What we want to learn today is that we meet the illusion on its universal level, not on its local level. When you meet it on the local level, you're not ready for the greater works. You've got to meet it on its universal level. And so, if we were to meet the earthquake, we would not meet it as an earthquake in this area of California. We would meet it as the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And we would have to know that the earthquake is an impossibility in God's spiritual kingdom. We don't have to determine where it might strike or when it might strike. We have to determine the truth, not the nature of the illusion or the nature of the lie. And if we know the truth, this knowing will be that God, being spirit, being all, is not material, and that matter has no existence in God. There is no matter to quake. That earthquake is going to be a mental idea before it ever seems to be a physical tremor. And when there is a receptivity to the carnal mind which says it's possible that there is a material world and that it can quake, then that individual is part of the group illusion, the group unawareness of the allness of spirit. God is not in the whirlwind. God is not in the earthquake, meaning spirit is not in matter. Now, the importance of knowing that spirit is not in matter about an earthquake or about a head cold ultimately takes you to a more important knowing, that when you know spirit is not in matter, you know that spirit does not die. When you solve the illusion of earthquake, you've also solved the illusion of death. In fact, when you solve any one form of the illusion, you've solved all illusion. It only appears to human sense that some are bigger than others. The earthquake is no bigger than the head cold because of the same illusion. Now, we're going to be prepared before our series is over, before the next 4 classes, we're going to be prepared to be able to participate in world work effectively. And our participation will be on the basis of knowing that where the world appears to be, my spirit is. And we're going to know that well enough so that whatever occurs in our communities or in any part of the world that is brought to our attention can be met not as a local event, but as a universal lie, a universal nothingness, so that you don't meet a head cold in your head. You meet it as a universal lie. And then not only will your head cold disappear, but many others, and you will not even know who has benefited by your work. But that is the reason for the lie coming to you. For you to stand in the light, not just to release yourself, but to see always the universal nature of the lie. And then you become a permanent light working in world work all the time. It doesn't matter what illusion touches you, you remove the belief in the universal nature of that lie, not the local nature of it alone. And you'll find suddenly you have discovered deep well springs of power. Now, there has been much talk and some fear has been expressed to me about this earthquake because it seems to be prognostication time again. And so the experts have set us down for 9 a.m. on January 4th. And I think this would be a good time for us to begin our world work. It's getting ahead of the next chapter, but we'll call this a tune-up. We have here then a condition in which world belief is that God in some way is either absent or permissive or impotent. And so all we have to do is to ask ourselves one question. Do we believe in the omnipotence of God or do we not? Now, if you don't believe in the omnipotence of God, then more than an earthquake can terrorize you. But if you begin to accept omnipotence as a fact, then all that remains is, how can you and that fact become one? In other words, how can you in this 4th level of the world extend your awareness into a higher level so that you are not a separate human being in a separate human body, but are one with the very power of God? For when you are one with the power of God, then all that appears to be the power of an earthquake is rendered null and void. So this is an excellent opportunity for us to take a second look at what may be called the divine blueprint. What are we here for? Humanhood has been thought to be the nature of our being. And we were always seeking human ways to make a better humanhood. But now, let's look at humanhood as a seed. That we have to plant something while we're here, something that takes root in God and lifts us beyond the appearance of humanhood. So that as the seed of our being takes root in a higher level, let's say just the fifth level, the activity of Christ begins to function more noticeably in our experience, lifting us, dissolving mortal sense, material sense, limited sense, finite sense, belief in good and evil, belief in the powers of evil. Finally, this light within, from the fifth level, establishes itself as the very light of our being. Now we can see that where the man Jesus became aware of the light called Christ, that was evidence that this everywhere light is the light of us waiting for our acceptance. And as we accept it, as we learn it is present where we are, that it is alive, that Christ is always living, that wherever God is, Christ is. Then we accept God is where I am, and wherever God is, Christ must be where I am. We're beginning to take root in the light of being. The human seed is dissolving, personal sense is stepping away. We're taking root in Christ here, where I am. And we find that as we become more aware that God is here as the living Christ that I am, we begin to get a knowledge that I cannot be in a mortal body, because Christ is not in a mortal body. Christ here is in an immortal body. Christ here is in a spiritual body. And Christ here I am. The root in the fifth level dissolves the false beliefs in the fourth level. The human mind, which is controlled by the universal carnal mind, ceases to accept the beliefs of its false father. I learned that one of my great secrets is never to deny that I am the light of God. Never to deny that I am the Spirit. Never to deny that I am the Christ. Never to deny that you are the Christ, the light, the Spirit. Never to deny that any one on earth is. In other words, fidelity to identity deepens the root and it begins to sprout. The fifth level begins to feed you the oil, the substance. And soon the living will of God begins to move you. And there's a great secret there. When carnal mind moves you through your human mind, you're in the carnal will and it moves your physical form. When divine will moves you, it moves your spiritual form. And so the divine will functioning in you moves your spiritual form in God-ordained acts. And then they appear in the fourth level as the movements of your physical form. Without that step, without the divine ordination coming from the higher level of divine will, all that moves your physical form is carnal mind, without any connection whatsoever to true being. You walk through an entire mortal lifespan completely outside of reality. But when the deeper root of divine will moves through you, that which moves your physical form, the carnal mind, is without power completely. Your acts are ordained. And now you can discover that where you are walking under divine will, under the awareness of spiritual self, there can be no earthquake. It is impossible. There can be no head cold. There can be no pain. There can be no limitation. There can be no lack. The oil of the substance is forming itself from the higher level. And the miracle of a Jesus Christ is happening in your own being. The very light that shone through Jesus is shining through you. You're dissolving mortal sense, and the fifth world is beginning to open its doors. The eye is being lifted, and the eye is doing the lifting itself. The light that came through Jesus was the death of mortality and the birth of Christ. The light that comes through you is the death of mortality and the birth of Christ. A new mind, the Christ mind, replaces the human mind. Just as Jesus was replaced by Christ. As the false self falls away, Christ takes over as your being. You discover that everything you've been doing has been a preparation for Christ in you to take over. You are opening your consciousness to the one, that Christ may take over and lead you into the fifth, the sixth, the seventh levels of consciousness. Out of this world, out of good humanhood and bad humanhood, out of the carnal mind illusion called humanhood, out of carnal mind itself, into the purity of being. This is a spiritual transfusion. It takes place, and sometimes very quickly. The quickening shows you that you're in a new level of thought. And now there is no illusion on the face of the earth, regardless of its form or its nature, that can hypnotize the Christ of your being. To deny selfhood is to accept an earthquake. To deny selfhood is to accept the head cold. Even when it's there, it isn't there. Even when the earth trembles, it doesn't tremble. These are cosmic suggestions. You can have the head cold visibly and physically feel it, but it isn't there. And when you know it isn't there, you're being faithful to identity. Through the sniffles, through the wet Kleenex, it isn't there because God didn't create it. Because there is no material universe. Because there is only the body of life. And in your fidelity to this identity, which is I, the light, which expressed through Jesus, which is expressing through you, you find you're lifted to a place where you're ready for the greater works. And those greater works cannot be anticipated. But they come whenever you have been able to discard the belief that God could be present where evil appears to be, or that God could countenance evil, or that God could create evil, or that God could be impotent in the face of evil. All of those beliefs are the belief that God is not where you stand, that you are something separate and apart from God's self. And as long as you rest in that false belief, then the whole world of illusion appears to you as separate, different conditions of human form and material form, and you're a complete vulnerable subject for all of the so-called evil on earth. A change of thought, a change of identity, and acceptance through perfect faith that the words of the Father are true, that God is your Father, that you are the child, you are the Spirit, you are the light, you are the life, and that quickening process begins. Of course, you can see the earthquake then in its true light. A large group of people, aware only of the material universe, separated from their own individual identity, unaware of the light of Christ, walking the earth in bodies of clay, in material senses. They are victimized by the carnal mind of the world. They have no defense. The carnal mind functions the human mind. It controls it. It enslaves it. And through that human mind it projects its concepts. Once we're caught up in it, it's difficult to see our way through. But when we are in identity, when we know who we are, when we practice living in and as that which we're told by the Father we are, the child of God, the Son of God, what right have we to say, I, the Son of God, can be hurt by an earthquake? The contradiction is so obvious then. The acceptance of the earthquake was the denial that you are the child of God. Not living with the knowledge that I am the Son of God, we succumb to all of the suggestions around us. Now, Joel has taught us that there is one illusion. And so we don't have to try to figure out what about this? Is this of the carnal mind, and what about that? This world is of the carnal mind. And in our work we must come to that conclusion which states that nothing in this world is created by God. Nothing in this world. There is nothing in this world that is not created by the carnal mind. It is a complete carnal mind creation. All of it. Because it is the fourth world, the fourth level. And only when you let your human sense of self be a seed and rooted in God, which is identity, everywhere, will you find relief from the fifth level, taking you up above the cosmic illusion called world. If you start making exceptions, thinking this is not of the carnal mind, but that is, because this is good and that isn't, you're wrong. This world is the carnal mind made visible. And all evil that exists in this world exists only in the carnal mind that projects the evil. It has no rise in God, no law to sustain it. And when we live in this world, we're not living under divine law. Now that doesn't mean when the dog is beaten, you don't want to help the dog. It doesn't mean you don't try to get rid of the head cold. It means that you add your new dimension always. That dimension for which you live. The dimension which is invisible, which is light. That light made visible through Jesus Christ as a force. That light is the light of your being. And when you accept it, then I, the light, and the infinite Father are one. And there is no power needed anymore. The knowing of that truth consciously is the power. It does all the work. If you know that I am the light which is one with the infinite, you cannot now turn around and expect an earthquake in the infinite light. And so you're standing on the knowledge of what you are with a need for no power whatsoever. For what you are is the only power. And when you experience that it really is, you see why to know the truth is sufficient. Sometimes you'll think you know the truth, and you'll be dismayed to find that something happens which you thought might not happen because you thought you knew the truth. And that's because your knowing of the truth is simply mental. It isn't the consciousness of truth, the spirit of truth. It hasn't been lived in long enough to take root so that you have perfect faith. Now most of us by now can heal things. But fear will always crop in. And the reason it does is because it is alerting us to the fact that our consciousness is still in a semi-sense of separation. You couldn't feel that where I am God walks and have fear. And so there is still that unawareness of the presence of God where you are. Not practicing the presence is practicing the absence. And carnal mind is very quick to find all of the gaps in your consciousness. And then you're forced into a false sense of separation, and before you know it, here comes the tidal wave. Now in our world work, we're going to look out upon the world, not to improve it or to heal it. Because that's part of the trap of the carnal mind. The minute it gets you to want to heal something, you've been trapped into accepting something that exists which is not the Spirit of God. When we do our world work then, and we've had now many years of preparation for it, it will not be to improve the world, because that would be the trap. That's what carnal mind always wants to force you to do. But rather you're to know the spiritual nature of what is present where the world appears to be. You're really to discover yourself everywhere in your world work. We won't be praying that God remove a condition from the world like war, or that God takes away the flood in the Gulf of Mexico, or that God prevents certain conditions, or that God empties out a hospital ward. Rather, we will be knowing first that where I stand is the light of God. Without that as a beginning, you have no fulcrum. You have nothing to tie on to. You can't just have a God out there. You must begin in the here-ness of your own being. Where I stand is the light of God, and no other. If you're going to do successful world work, it's going to be by beginning at that level. Where you stand is the light of God. This is a 24-hour truth. And if you practice that truth, no matter what you do, you'll find it takes root until your conviction is fully established. And then you aren't forced to use words to drive home the point. You find that you have that total conviction. It needs no verbal reinforcement. Where you are is the light of God. Why? Because the child of God is the light of God. Where God is, the light of God is. And the light of God is where you are because God is there. That light you are. As this deepens, you are one with the light everywhere in your consciousness. Now you, in the light, as the light, one with the light everywhere, can find nothing in the infinite light of your being except the light. And that's your consciousness. Living light. Where you stand, connected to everywhere light, so that all is the one light. I and the Father are one. I am the light of the world. Where the world appears, there is no world, there is only I, the light. I am the light where the world appears. This becomes your awareness. And now you stand in that, and whatever comes into carnal mind, into human mind, to present to you a suggestion that you are not the light where you are, which is one with the light everywhere, you look at this suggestion and you find there's no place for it to take root. It comes into the consciousness which cannot accept it. This is the consciousness of light which is too pure to be defiled, too pure to behold iniquity. Nothing can enter to defile it or make a lie. You don't need any power. You don't need any statements. You have this daily building of the consciousness of the light here is the light everywhere, and nothing else exists. And through this light, the power of the light dispels the false, presumed power of the darkness. The earthquakes are lined, are unwrinkled. The floods are dried up. The diseases are dissolved. You stand in that truth. You don't go out to dissolve those diseases or to repair fences or to raise the dead. You stand in the light of your own being, knowing that light is everywhere, one light, and let the light do its own revealing. That's the kind of way in which we will do our world work. And then one day, when we're in different parts of the world and not grouped together here in a room, you'll find we're still doing our world work, so that you are doing it in one city and someone else in another. Whatever comes to your attention in your particular area, you meet the same way. And you're doing world work, because you're never meeting it as a local situation. You're meeting it by knowing the light I am is the light everywhere. And it needs no further power other than to know the truth. The light I am here is the light everywhere, and this becomes a law unto you. All karmic law is broken. Your soul is finding conscious oneness with its source. And all of the patient years of mortality are finally bearing fruit as the soul is now lifting you to the next level of consciousness, the fifth level, in which the light that you are dispels the total darkness of the fourth world. Lifting the eye, the rising Christ of your own being lifts you out of this world. And when Jesus was lifted out of this world that way, his form still appeared in the world. They now saw a fifth level form in the fourth level. Your form will continue to appear in this world. Don't expect to disappear. But you will find that your form in the visible is now working as an outward appearance in conjunction with a new invisible form. That one is the outer expression of the inner. And your form is in taking orders from the carnal mind of the universe. It doesn't get a cold just because everybody else does. You find your mind is replaced. It doesn't fear. You find that the false goals of humanhood do not tempt you anymore. Your goals are totally different. They are simply to be faithful, to let the outer serve the inner. Your perfect faith says to you, I have no personal goals. The light is complete. The light is whole. The light is not lacking. The light isn't trying to become. The light accepts that it already is. And so if you find yourself striving to become, you're caught in the trap of the carnal mind, trying to be a better or more successful human, and the temptation of the world mind is functioning in you only because you are still rebelling against identity. If you find you still got that yen for success, or for greater comforts in the world, or for some kind of personal improvement, you're still under the hypnosis that you are not the light. Seek ye first the light, which is the kingdom. Now this is a going away from the world, not a better human way. This is the meekness, which is the strength. The great disguise for strength is the meekness unto the Spirit. All of this world is an illusion. For right where this world appears to be is the light of being. And as you walk in that light consciously, you will find you are being lifted to new levels of consciousness which will culminate in the seventh level. The level of full awareness of a permanent self, a permanent life, as the pure Spirit of God. If we're not in our daily divinity, we're in daily karma. Whenever you step out of divinity, you're stepping into karma. Whenever you step into divinity, you are crossing out karma. And that is the reason this carnal mind of the world is here. We've never questioned that we grow up from children. We don't say, why wasn't I born an adult? We do question and say, why wasn't I born as a perfect Spirit of God then, if that's what I am? What's the sense of all this illusion? Why don't we just start right out with all of it? Well, then you'd have to say, why do we ever get born as children at all? Why don't we just start out as perfect adults? Infinity is too vast. You must let your soul continue its journey through infinity. And at the present level of our journey, we're in that mortal sense of the world carnal mind, and we're being lifted out of it by fidelity to the light of my own being where I stand. Whoever holds on to the light of their being will find that the light is the way. It will illuminate you. Now then, you'll still have head colds. You'll still have fears. You'll still find things go wrong. You'll find you're still disturbed. You're still resentful. But these diminish and diminish, and then the head cold that you have doesn't last the whole week. You manage to shake it a little quicker than someone else. The fears diminish. The disturbances diminish. We begin to see the utter nothingness of our human resentments. More and more we're lifted into the perfect love of the perfect Father. Don't ever be ashamed of your difficulties in this work. They only happen because they're necessary. They're necessary for you to know that that difficulty is there because you are not standing as the light. You are rejecting fatherhood of God, identity as the light of the Father. Make the adjustment, accept yourself, and know that this light that you are is one with the eternal light, the infinite light, and all of that light, the infinite eternal light, is right where you are, always. Nothing is impossible unto it. It is functioning, and carnal mind finds that you are now no stranger to the light, cannot manipulate you. Mankind is stopped at this human level, but we go beyond it. We do not stop at it, and it is our function not only to lift ourselves out of it, but to lift the world with us. We are to lift the world out of its humanhood. We may not hide our light under a bushel. The same light that Christ says to you, you are the light, you inwardly are saying to your neighbor, and ye are the light. There's no victim there. The victim is the illusion of the carnal mind. Right where the victim appears to be, you recognize the invisible light of your own being. Place your own invisible light wherever the world presents an illusion, until you have one infinite, homogenized, perfect light everywhere. And you will be led. This is the bread of the Father, instead of the bread of this world. This is the Spirit of the Father, instead of the might and power of this world. This is the meekness. Suddenly you know. This power of the Father has always been present. It was never absent. You know the world suffers only from its illusions. And you are standing above the illusions of the world. You are ready to be a spiritual worker in the Father's kingdom. You have substance, the bread of life, the very light itself flowing as your own identity everywhere. It takes a great deal of courage to stand in the face of something that you fear and to stand on it knowing I am the light And this that I fear has no power over the light. But when you've done it, you know the truth of it. It takes great courage to stand on the light of someone else's being. And no, this cannot take place over there where that person is, for there is the light. And every appearance is met that way. Perfect faith casteth out all fear. Not faith that God is going to do something, but the faith that God has already done it. God's perfection is already the fact in all things. That's your perfect faith. And the reason the world suffers is because it has not been taught perfect faith in God's presence everywhere. And so you've got to stand for the world, for your friends, for your loved ones. You've got to present that perfect faith to the Father for them. When you pray, pray not for that person. Pray by recognizing the universal nature of perfection, in which that condition which is presenting itself has no reality. And you are free more than meets the eye. Just to review it quickly, let's take the head cold. It's not that you don't have the head cold, it's that there is none anywhere. Don't meet it on its little finite level. There isn't any. Anywhere. There's carnal mind presenting the illusion of head colds in 5 million different places, but that's all they are. There are 500 million places saying that God isn't there, and you know better. That's what your function is, to know better. And then even though the appearance may have localized itself where you are, your knowing it on a universal level will remove it on your local level and other local levels. Don't know it just locally. That's the point of this recognizing carnal mind as the tempter, the assassin, the evildoer, the devil. Don't bring it down to local levels. As Joel's work increased in tempo and as he was coming into the home stretch of his mission on earth, more and more he brought to our attention not to meet the problem at the level of a local situation, but to recognize it as a universal carnal mind temptation. And even though humanly we may not quite understand why, when you do meet it that way, you do understand why. Because you banish the whole power of carnal mind by meeting it that way. And the power falls away, the presumed power. You find you're in the clarity of truth. I don't think in one lesson we're going to resolve that technique, but I'd like to get it across today because by the 14th of January we're going to have completed our lessons in world work. And I'd like to spend that month between the 14th of January and the 11th of February when we're not together. I'd like to spend it doing world work with each other so that we're prepared to meet these things. I think we could probably pause now and resume in a short time. I'm sure there's much more in the chapter here now that will reinforce our study on this aspect of the work. Let's be back in about 5 minutes. Now, some of these things that we're discussing should be very normal and basic with us. Pardon? Some of these things should be very basic. I mean, we ought to have them behind us. In a sense, I almost feel that it shouldn't have been necessary to even discuss them today, but the questions that have been put to me through the week indicate that there are weaknesses still at this level. And maybe that's why we're still in the 11th chapter of this book, which, strangely enough, is totally dedicated to the false appearances of the world. Now, this statement from Joel: in this world where an ignorance of truth predominates, we're constantly being faced with sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, with evil of every kind. If we have been spiritually taught, we will instantly recognize that these suggestions are appearances like the mirage on the desert. Do not accept appearances of good and evil at face value. Accept them only as mirage, illusion, a form of malpractice or hypnotism, and above all things, do not accept them as something that has to be healed. Now, the reason for that statement is, once you've accepted the mirage of evil, you don't go around healing a mirage. So if you want to heal it, to you it's real, a reality, not a mirage. And you miss the first step, which is the mirage is caused by our material sense, coordinated with the world mind. And so there's that pause now, that inner Sabbath, that resting in the Word, that the material sense produces the mirage of matter, and the evil condition in the mirage of matter must be as much mirage as the matter itself. And so your conclusion finally is, there is no matter in God's universe, and there are no material conditions in God's universe. And as the child of God, you're committed to living in God's universe, not in the world of the carnal mind. And so this is a new lifestyle, isn't it? There is no matter, and there are no material conditions. And even though you're going to go around in a world of matter and material conditions, in your lifestyle as the child of the Father, the light of the world, this must be your constant knowledge. Jesus didn't say, I won't make the cripple walk because there is no cripple, and then turn away and forget about it. He accepted it on the terms that came to him from the world, as we learn to do. But we reinterpret it on our own divine terms. We do not walk away from it and pretend it isn't there, but rather we reveal that something better is there by the knowledge that where the mirage appears, I do not have to remove that mirage, but rather that which is where the mirage is the light of being. The recognition of the one invisible light, always centering in the light where you are so that you're connected, And that consciousness becomes the health of every detail of your life. That's the miracle of spiritual recognition. That's the new dimension of life that we learn to live while we walk in the world. We're not pretending that things aren't there. We're recognizing that something else is there. We're not telling the world that man isn't sick. We're knowing that all that is there where that man appears to be sick is the light of God, and our knowing is within ourselves, not on the tip of our tongue. It's a permanent knowing. And so don't try to improve the mirage. Just rest in being spirit, being light. And you'll find that when you are resting in being light, the light reveals itself. Our weakness is that once we have established that we're the light, we want to still do something, which is a denial of that which we have just established. We are the light, which is perfect. We are the light there, which is perfect, as well as here. There's nothing to be done but rest in the Word. It's amazing how many things that you thought were real are then uncovered as mirage as you do this. You find the enchantment of walking in the spiritual universe is yours. Nothing has to be healed, reformed, changed, or corrected. We really do not have to get rid of any of the sins, diseases, lacks, or limitations of the persons who come to us. We merely have to refuse to accept the appearances and realize that whatever is presented to us is a state of hypnotism producing an illusion, a mirage. There are two kinds of persons who study this work. One kind says, what is there in this that is good for me? And you'll find that person cannot really put this message into practice, because the very nature of that type of consciousness repels truth. The other individual says, what is the truth? Wherever that is, that's where I go. Now that individual can put this into practice, because they haven't narrowed it down to what of this that I have heard is good for me. They are not conflicting their personal sense with truth and interpreting that which is truth only in the nature or degree to which it helps their personal sense. If you still have yourself lingering in this what is good for me attitude, you will miss a great percentage of what is coming across. It must be an unconditioned quest for truth alone. And then you'll find the personal me is out of the way. There was no personal me where Christ expressed as the visible Jesus. There was an unconditioned self. There was a one which was one with all. If it was what's good for me, the message never would have reached this level that we have it at now. I mention this because those who are still in the what's good in it for me may not realize that they're blocking the light of their own being. This is above personal improvement. You don't try to improve the mirage you call your human body or your human self. That's an obstacle. You accept your perfect self where the human body appears. And that perfect self is never going to be tarnished, never going to in any way be less than its perfect self. This is different than a better human you. Your perfect self is there. And unless you're living in your perfect self, you're living in a second or false self, which cannot benefit by divine law. Every problem you have is in that imperfect self you have accepted to be you, which isn't there. Your perfect self does not contain problems. Your perfect self is walking in reality. Your perfect self is permanent. And the mirage of physical form, human life, cannot be accepted if you wish to accept the fatherhood of God. These are issues that must be met, or else you spend the rest of your years improving or trying to improve that which is invisibly perfect. If you work with the present perfection of your being, you won't need as many words to convince you. It has a way of identifying itself. In God's kingdom, there is not a sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. Now, if there is no sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation in God's kingdom, that's another way of saying that there is no sin, death, disease, lack, or limitation anywhere. The allness of God's kingdom means that there is no sin, there is no lack, there is no limitation, there is no disease, there is no death. And when the Master says, raise them from the dead, it means from the belief that there is death. You raise someone from sin, you raise them from the belief that there is sin. Always, all that is evil is the belief, never the fact. The belief is all that is there, and it is made visible as what we have accepted as the fact. Where the fact appears to be, we are looking at our own belief made visible. And the eradication of the belief eradicates the mirage which we thought was the fact. Then you can say, carnal mind, I recognize your method. You place a belief in me, which I subconsciously accept, then it becomes a conscious belief, then it becomes a fact, and now I think I've got it. But this that appears to me as a fact, which I'd like to get rid of, isn't a fact at all. I can't get rid of it. It is a belief made into a visible mirage. Get behind the mirage to the belief and face the belief with truth. The belief is you have this thing. The fact is God didn't create this thing. What is sustaining it? God isn't. Your belief is sustaining it. And carnal mind is making you believe that. Carnal mind is making you accept that. You're a victim of carnal mind. The truth will make you free. What God did not create is not here. That's the truth. This thing that disturbs me is not here. I don't have to get rid of it. I must get rid of my belief that it is here. And I do that by knowing the truth, that God did not place it here And therefore it is not here. It can be a world war holocaust, it can be an earthquake, it can be a germ, it can be anything that God didn't make, and it cannot be here. It's just a world belief hanging in space waiting for me to say yes, 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 and I refuse to. You don't remove it, you recognize its non-reality. Now we should be clear then of a lot of things, able to shuffle off most of the things that superimpose themselves in our consciousness one way or another. We should be almost free enough that we're ready to say, thou seest me, thou seest the Father. Even if there's a momentary flaw brought into visible experience, it has nothing to do with you. It's just world thought traveling by. Why detain it? Let it go. Let it go right on its merry way. Don't stop it and claim it for your own. Let it go. It has nothing to do with you. And then we have an open consciousness. We're not a repository for the world's false beliefs. The instant you're faced with a false belief in your consciousness, recognize it. It's just world thought traveling through. Let it go. You'll find it continues right past you. And the false belief that this was going to be bad, or that was going to be bad, or this was not going to be improved, all of that goes right with the world thought. Perfection has ever been there, and when a cloud of world thought passes by, it shines through again. We come unconditioned. We don't have to sit and anticipate problems or worry about what might be, or come to face every day with that funny feeling that I wonder what today is going to bring to me that I have to combat. We start the day in a fresh consciousness of the perfect presence of God everywhere. You don't carry anything from yesterday into today to worry about. Wouldn't it be marvelous to begin every day that free and clear, that all of the yesterdays, with all of the problems they presented, are behind you? And yet that's the truth, isn't it? Spirit is never carrying over memories of this material world into this minute of today. Who's doing it? Our unawareness of the world mind that functions in us as us. When we are wise to it, we can begin a day completely free of all worry, free of all concern, knowing that I am the living light of the Father now and forever. I've opened a new book. When you start your day with that awareness, you don't have the seeds of yesterday's problems to grow into great big oaks today. And you don't have as much to combat or to get rid of. It's a fresh, new, beautiful, spiritual day. And if it isn't, you're still in duality. Still accepting the mirage as something you've got to live with. Speaking of the fact that many of the healing works do not come off as we like them to, Joel offers two reasons. The first is a very simple reason. The practitioner hasn't got what it takes. He says, let's face it, our practitioners aren't living in the truth all the time. And because of it, they don't have the truth to be witnesses all the time. But there's a second reason, he said, and this is the second reason. The other reason is that the patients will not yield. They usually have in mind the changing of an evil condition into a good one. And this acts as a barrier. Spiritual healing is not changing an evil condition into a good one. Healing is really the changing of consciousness. And very often there's a reluctance or unwillingness to yield up whatever it is that is acting as a block. Now, I have met that. I have known that there were certain blocks in certain individuals. But it's a delicate subject. You just can't say to a person, this is your block. First of all, because you never really can be sure what the block is. You can only think you know. And secondly, as Joel points out here, people resent being told that they have this point of view. They may hate someone very desperately and don't know it. They may fear a condition very desperately and don't know it. They may be hanging on to an untruth. I know one person who had a sense of guilt about something, and really there weren't any words you could give to that person that would make them lose that sense of guilt. And as long as that sense of guilt remained, the work that had to be done couldn't get through, because the point here is to change the individual's consciousness. And if the sense of guilt is there, that's the consciousness. Now, what are they guilty about? There was a personal sense there. Guilt is of a personal nature. Guilt was the feeling that they hadn't done something they should have done. Well, a change of consciousness would mean that there's no me here to do or not to do. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father. Here is the light of God. This person having the guilt complex refused to accept their identity as the light. I may be the light, but look what I did. Well, the light has nothing to do that could be wrong. And so by insisting on a guilt complex, taking the blame for something, this individual was rejecting the light of God as their own individual selfhood. And that was a block. Oh, there are many other blocks. We hold many people in a state of malpractice because we see them as they appear to be. And we insist that's the way they are. And then we may want them to be healed of something, but we're still holding them in that light, that false sense of humanhood. We've got mortal beings on our hand, physical bodies on our hand. And then when it comes to us, we haven't really come to that total acceptance of ourselves as the light. When we do, then we're not a barrier. There are some people who can call you for help, and all you've got to do is hear their voice, and before that happens, you're all aflame with light. It's as if there's just nothing between you. It's one light. There are some people who invariably call you up and say, every time I call you, it's always almost instantaneous. And you're thinking to yourself, it's not me, I can tell you that. It's you. There's something that some individual has as a block and something that others have as not a block. And, as Joel points out, that's only the second reason. The first one was the practitioner in the first place. Sometimes the human element enters. Certain people will affect you and shouldn't. You shouldn't be affected by that. Or you'll get desperate and you say, oh, I can't have that happen to poor Mrs. So-and-so. And right then you've hurt her. So on. Now, continuing his thought, in infinite way work, we are not turning to God to heal anybody. We do not have the kind of God who would let anyone be sick if it were within his knowledge. And since all in reality is in the knowledge of God, God isn't letting anyone get sick. Now, who's sick? The personal sense of self. And the personal sense of self, when we are lifted high enough, being out of the way, there's no one there to be sick. Finally, there's no one there to be sick forever, because there's no personal sense of self. So you see why healing is just a part of the work, an incidental part. It's a part of the way on the path to being lifted above the personal sense of self. The ultimate is that Christ takes over where you are and lives your life. And when Christ takes over and lives your life, you have fulfilled your mission. You fulfill the divine blueprint at this level, yielding to Christ. When Christ lives your life, you have your own personal physician. If we recognize God to be omniscience and omnipotence, then surely we cannot find anyone outside of God's knowledge. So who can we heal? It would be just as much of a mirage to think you're healing someone as for them to think they're being healed. Because then practitioner and patient would be both in a false sense of self. But suppose patient and practitioner are both in the knowledge that I am the light. Then whatever temporarily seems to need healing yields very quickly. Two or more in the light. Now in your world work, people will be reaching for the light of their own being, and you will bring to it the knowledge that you are the light of their being. And that will be two or more. For the soul of everyone is yearning for the light, driving us to that conscious union. Now our healing work takes a new turn. No sin, no disease are supported by a law of God. You see, just hanging out there without God's support, what is it? Is it there if God isn't supporting it? It may seem a vast thing in the cosmic fourth world, because we're just a little entity as a human being looking at this fourth world. And so to us it's big, it's hovering, it's there. But it's not there. If we could remove personal sense of me and I be the light, this vast thing would just vanish. It only hangs there because there's personal sense looking at it. That's what makes it hang there. That's what makes cancer stay on the earth. That's what makes earthquakes stay on the earth. That's what makes all disease stay on the earth. We're looking at them out of our personal sense, perpetuating that which isn't there. As you withdraw from personal sense, you withdraw from the diseases of the world. You don't heal them. You recognize they aren't there. They do not exist in the light of God, which is all that is present. Sin, disease, never supported by law of God, because if they were, they would be eternal. We never hope to change anything supported by God. The fact that we do break through our sins, diseases, lacks, is sufficient proof that there never was a law of God supporting them. There was only a law of matter, a law of mind. But these are not laws of God. And for this reason, any form of evil can be dispelled. Therefore, we need never be afraid to try to heal, regardless of the name or nature of a claim, because, to begin with, we have the awareness that there is no law of God supporting it, no law of God maintaining it, because it is an erroneous condition. And we know that no law of God created it. This is all part of the purifying of our consciousness. We're finally exonerating God from creating evils, and from supporting evils, and from countenancing evils. Now, in my own work, it's easy to get caught up in all these words. Even while you're learning, it's difficult to assimilate it into a practical way of life. And I find the best way to assimilate it is that no matter what you face, whatever its nature, don't waste your time trying to figure it out. The fact is that only God is present. Whatever comes at you and labels itself this or that or the other thing, go to your knowledge that God is present. That's accepting omnipresence. The minute you've accepted that God is present, you get a whole new perspective about it. Because if God is present, what are you going to do about it that God hasn't already done? The minute you know God is present, there's a new stability. God is present. Now, where's the earthquake going to be in God's presence? You see how the belief in the earthquake is atheism? The belief in the reality of a head cold is atheism? The belief in the reality of any form of evil is atheism? God is present, and the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness of the earth. Is that earth going to quake? What's going to quake? The world mind's going to quake. That's all. That's where the earthquake's going to take place, in the world mind. That's where the head cold takes place, in the world mind. That's where every evil takes place, in the world mind. And all you've got to do is stay in the world mind if you want to share in those evils. That's where the mirage takes place, in the world mind. And when you have accepted God's presence where you are, where the world is, strangely, those evils do not come nigh thy dwelling. It's all in accepting God's presence everywhere and where you are. And as you stand in that, you know God has the power to maintain a perfect universe, so where can the evil be? That world mind is knocking on your Christ mind. It can't enter. Whatever God has, you have. Wherever God is, you are. In that consciousness, you are not open to that which defiles. And so instead of reaching for the little jar in the medicine cabinet, suppose you reach for that little conscious awareness that God is where you are, and see if that doesn't do the job. There was no earthquake in the Christ, and if you're in the Christ consciousness, there's no earthquake in you. It goes right around and makes a detour, leaving even one little rose to bloom if necessary. We are not dividing his garment, as the soldiers did when the Master was on the cross. One seamless garment, the invisible light everywhere, and there's no place in it for division. God is never divided. God never divides himself. There's no place in it for material activity. There's no place in it for evil activity. That consciousness is the realization of oneness. And so anyone, says Joel, can practice healing at any time, if he will realize the basic principle that he's not trying to heal a disease or a condition or a sin or a false appetite. The moment anyone tries to do that, he's trapped, and there will be no healing. We are not dealing with conditions. We are dealing with universal belief in a selfhood apart from God, a universal ignorance, a universal hypnotism, but only an appearance. There is no self apart from God, and therefore there can be no evil anywhere. Now you have the capacity within yourself to heal alcoholics and drug addicts. And I'll tell you exactly how. It'll shock you because it's so simple. When you can reach the realization that there is no liquor, you'll find you have the way to heal any alcoholic who comes to you. Liquor does not exist. When you find that you know that drugs do not exist, you'll find you have the answer to healing a drug addict. There is no drug. Did God create them? If you believe they exist, you're going to try to heal the drug addict or heal the alcoholic. You can't heal them. You have to know the unreality of the person, the unreality of the condition, the very unreality of that which seemingly is causing them to be alcoholics and drug addicts. God didn't make liquor. God made nothing material. There is no liquor. That's how you'll heal an alcoholic, when you have the realization of it, that there is no liquor, period. Stop right there. You want to heal smoking? There are no cigarettes. They don't exist. Oh, you reach for an illusion and you puff an illusion and you think you're smoking. But when you know there are no cigarettes, you'll find you will not smoke if you don't want to. That's how you break it. There is no material world. There is no cigarette. See, we can't go on thinking there's a material cigarette, there's a material bottle of booze. There isn't any. You want to enjoy it, go ahead. But it isn't there. And if you want to break the habit, it isn't there, is the answer. This will come to you someday as a quick realization, a conviction, an awareness of the non-reality of matter. And you'll see why Joel says anyone can heal. What you've got to do is know the truth. But you've got to know it all the time. Stay with it. Finally, in the infinite way, we never give a treatment to a person. We give the treatment to ourselves. We are the one under treatment because we are the one to whom the appearance has been brought. And it must be met in our own consciousness, going immediately to the eye of our being. When I said we go to God, this is another way of saying we go to I. God, where you are, is the light, going to the eye of your being, meaning accepting that I, the self of me, is the Spirit of God. That's going to the eye of your being. That's the beginning of treating you instead of the patient. And it must be met in our own consciousness, going immediately to the eye of our being, abiding there until we come to the conclusion that I, here, the light of God, and my Father, the infinite, are one. I here and the infinite are one. This, then, is a universal truth. We wrestle with this truth within ourselves until we now come to the point of conviction that all there is spirit. Now, we haven't told that person stop smoking, stop drinking, stop taking drugs. But that person has come to you for you to help them stop, and you recognize this truth here in yourself. All that's here is spirit, and there is spirit. Finally comes, you know that is true. In a few moments comes a deep sense of peace, a click, a deep breath, something or other, and I know that God is on the scene. That's all there is to it, says Joel. As you can see, I've had nothing to do with the patient. That's all there is to it. Over 16 years, he was able to establish that that's all there is to it. But he established it. And as we put in our time, we'll discover that we can say that's all there is to it. As long as there's a me here trying to heal a you there, we're getting nowhere. And so self-crucifixion, which is what the practitioner learns, is also the secret of your living free of the horrors of the world. When you remove the personal sense and have only the light of God where you are, which is one with the light of God everywhere, you won't have to remove those evils. You will watch the invisible light bear witness to itself in the visible world. I think that's pretty clear. You made one more statement that seemed important to me. I think I'd rather look at it in the book. It's the last statement in that chapter. It is possible to bring the very presence of God to earth if you will meditate, make contact with your center, and let that presence be released into the world. The words to me that are important there is, it is possible. Meaning, I, Joel, have done it. Others before me have done it. Others with me have done it. Others will do it. It is possible to bring the very presence of God into your experience. And that should be our single-centered goal, to bring the very presence of God into our experience as a permanent dispensation. Don't wait to suffer. This is an always job, a constant job. You should always be the living presence of God where you are. The light of God must be your constant companion as yourself. And it is the light of everyone else that makes you one with the universe. You're moving in the grace of his presence. Next week we're going to look into the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the 20th chapter of John. We've come to the place where lifting up the eye, seeing the nothingness of self as person, is the accomplished fact of his demonstration on the earth. And now we want to understand and correlate that with our own spiritual progression. We want to find what the religions of the world have missed, that the light of the world, which came forth as the permanent life of Jesus Christ, was demonstrating that the permanent life of us is right where we stand. We are overlooking our permanent life as long as we stand in the sense of a second or material self. When that is cast aside, like Lazarus, we walk in the invisible body of the soul. Resurrection should take us into the conscious awareness of the invisible body of the soul. That's a Christmas present we owe ourselves. That will be our work next Sunday. Chapter 20 of the Gospel of John. And then we'll increase our capacity to do world work in the remaining 3 sessions. Thanks for bringing the sunshine where the world thought there was rain.